Today I'd like to talk about activating the abundant grace of God. I find people are very quick to acknowledge they need God's grace. I acknowledge that I need God's grace today. We need God's grace every day. We've been looking at James 4 verse 6, which says God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Now there's a very similar verse in 1 Peter 5 verse 5. I'm going to read from verse 5 to 7, the second half of verse 5. All of you clothe yourself with humility toward one another, because God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, that he might lift you up. And then cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. God cares for us, but that needs to be embraced as we humble ourselves before God. When I say humility activates the grace of God, we need to understand that the grace of God is free, the grace of God is abundant, the grace of God is sufficient, but the grace of God is not automatic. Jesus died on the cross for the sins of all mankind, but not all mankind is saved. We activate the grace of salvation by humbly accepting the death of Jesus Christ on the cross. When we humble ourselves before him and acknowledge by faith that Jesus died for us, the grace of salvation is released. Ephesians 2 verse 8 says, by grace we are saved by faith. Now, if I came and told you that I found another way to be saved, then you'll say I'm heretical. We are saved by the grace of God. But similarly, we need God's grace to do the things that God has called us to do and to face the challenges of life that life throws at us. We need God's grace in every aspect of our life. Jesus said, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So we are meant to do good works. We don't do good works in order to appease God or to earn his favor or to have him love us more. We do good works because we've already received God's acceptance and his love. But we are meant to do good works. But just as we need grace for salvation, we need grace to do what God's called us to do. Paul says in Ephesians 3 verse 7, I'm a minister of the gospel by the grace of God. In Ephesians 4, it talks about the ministry gifts that God has given the church, and he says he's given them by grace. In Romans 12, there's a whole list of what we call the motivational gifts or the charismatic gifts. Each one of us have this motivation of leadership or administration or mercy or generosity or serving and so on. Now, those gifts or talents are called charismatic gifts. The word charisma simply means the outworking of divine grace through a human person. It's still done by the grace of God. We need to activate and take hold of God's grace. In 1 Peter 4 verse 10, it says the following, each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others faithfully, administering God's grace in its various forms. So even the things we do is done by the grace of God. And to say that you could do your ministry, you can do your job, you can do your life calling without the grace of God is just as wrong as saying you can be saved without the grace of God. We activate that grace, we release that grace by humbly acknowledging before God that we need God's grace. It even says of Jesus in Hebrews that Jesus, by the grace of God, tasted death for every man. Even Jesus went to the cross, enabled by the grace of God, the enabling power of God's grace. And then life throws challenges at us. We face difficulties. We go through hard times. And when you face a difficulty or challenge, to think that you can face that in your own strength is just as wrong as thinking you can be saved by your own abilities or your own strength. So in difficulties, we acknowledge that we need God's grace. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 10, Paul talks about his thorn in the flesh, and he prayed to God that this difficulty would be removed from him. And then God replies to him in 2 Corinthians 10 verse 9 saying, my grace is sufficient for you. So we see that there's grace for us to be saved. There's grace for us to do the work that God's called us to do. And there's also grace for us to go through the challenges and difficulties of life. Now, if you need God's grace today or tomorrow or any other day, find a way to humble yourself before God and acknowledge that you need His grace. Ask so that the grace of God, the enabling power of God's grace, can be released over your life.